Ever since the idea of communism was popularized, people have viewed it as the perfect safe haven of a political economic system. This has been disproved by many failures over the years, a huge example of one being the Soviet Union and Russia. But people still believe it is the perfect solution because they cannot see the ways that it is fundamentally flawed. Communism has been shown to ruin the infrastructure in countries where the damage has lasted for decades. Communism even destroys things you wouldn't expect, such as creativity. And creativity is one of the things that sets humans apart from other animals. Even the original idea of Marx's economy was wrong. People often try to argue for communism, but often overlook the practical side of the governing system. Others may try to point out the problems with the other government systems, though these problems that they bring up are still prevalent in communism. Communism is a very flawed theory, in many ways, not just one. But one of the biggest flaws that I see is that communism destroys creativity, as I mentioned earlier. If you want to specialize in an area that creates items of personal value that do not hold any value for the community, then you can't. Communism, as a system, views these jobs as irrelevant because nobody has to buy these things because of value, because they don't hold value to the community. This is a large issue because some people may not be good at manual labor as communism requires, but these people may be good as musicians or artists. They would never find their true ability to be amazing in music or art because they would likely be forced into manual labor, because creating music only holds personal value to the people who listen to it. The biggest music producers in the world are the UK and America. These are both countries that have never been communist and will likely never be communist. For an example, in Soviet Russia, music was made, but it was very streamlined, guided by the government, and it was created for a purpose. There was no choice in what kind of music you wanted to make. It was all classical, and they all had to serve the purpose to a certain extent. The creator of Marxism, Karl Marx, had an economic logic that was very flawed. His logic was, a statue should be worth more than a computer because there is more labor put into creating a statue. This brings the economy to an almost primal stage, because that's very flawed logic. That logic ignores so many variables and factors that it seems so silly to use it as a basis of Marxism. Some of the factors that it ignores are 1. The price of original pieces to build the item may have very different values. 2. Different people will take different times for different tasks. So if you base work purely on labor of hours, then you get varying prices for the same item. 3. The personal value of the item and the demand for the item also change the price. Something that nobody wants and is in large supply will not be worth much, whereas an item that is in high demand but in low supply will have a high price. This works out into a very simple diagram. In this graph, it clearly shows how supply and demand works. With the logic that Marxism follows, this graph is completely irrelevant. But Thomas, you say, in communism everyone is born equal. How could you argue with that? Well, first of all, in communism, if you were to think about it with more detail than technically, people in communism aren't born equally either. Let's take two people, right? One of them is born into a family that grows crops, and the other is born into a family that works in a factory. Two very common jobs in a communist society. Each one of these children now has different opportunities. Both of them have to do hard manual labor, but there may be more free time when working in the factory, or the workload is slightly lighter when working on the farm. My point is that communism does not achieve complete equality. For an example, take the book The Giver. In the book, the people live in a very tight-knit community, which is very clearly run in a communist government. Everyone in the town receives equal opportunity, but in reality, the job that is chosen for them by the elders may have different honor or stigma surrounding it, meaning that each person is not equal and may even be looked down upon by the community. People, in my opinion at least, will never be equal, and never have been equal, and communism is no magical exception to this rule. Though people might like to change the way equality works, it is part of our human nature to try and bring ourselves on top. It is not true that communism is the only economy system that tries to create equality. On paper, all three major governing economic systems try to bring equality to the table, with socialism being the most practical at its job, and capitalism attempting to give everyone an equal opportunity in the world. In capitalism, there are flaws. Some people say that in capitalism there are flaws. What about production value check? In capitalism, no one checks the quality of items much. People bring up the issue of production quality checking in capitalism, but yet again fail to remember that these are also big issues in communism. One thing that I would like to point out before I continue about production quality is that when people think about issues in governing economic systems, they seem to have this idea that if a problem exists in one of them, it cannot exist in another. This is something that really gets on my nerves within discussions about these governing systems. Because, in reality, they point out a flaw with one system and instantly assume that their system will not have the issue as well. Back to production quality. One of the collapsing factors within the Soviet Union was that there was a very pathetic quality mark. People were working in factories building TVs. And these TVs that they would build would meet the standards, barely. And these people would be recognized as working so they would get their fair share of output, such as money, food, and other resources. Then, the people who are receiving their TVs would receive relatively faulty TVs and other faulty products. To sum it all up, communism was created to be this perfect governing system, but there are multiple factors that make it impractical. This has been shown through many failures and now backed up through the points I presented in this speech. I am in no way saying that capitalism and socialism are perfect, but I am explaining that communism is far from. It becomes blatantly obvious when even the creator of a manifesto of communism was incorrect. Humans still have yet to evolve to a stage where any of these governing systems would work and would make everyone equal. Thank you.